Welcome, everyone, and hello from beautiful Houston, Texas. We are thankful that you're joining us today for a discussion on a new Texas, a chapter from Power Concedes Nothing, How Grassroots Organizing Wins Elections, that I wrote with my colleague, Hany Khalil. It's about the work that Labor did in the 2020 election uh, to build power in Texas and push things forward for working people. My name is Jay Malone. I'm the political and communications director of the Texas Gulf Coast Area Labor Federation. This discussion has been organized by Convergence Magazine, magazine for radical insights, formerly known as Organizing Upgrade. Convergence works with organizers and activists on the front lines of today's most pressing struggles to produce articles, videos, and podcasts that sharpen our collective practice, lift up stories from the grassroots, and promote strategic debate. Our goal is to create the shared strategy needed to change our society and the world. So before we start, I wanted to give a big shout out to our audience watching live this evening on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Introduce yourself and drop your comments and questions in the chat. We'll do our best to engage your comments on the air. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to this channel. So our guests today are Texas-based organizers, Hany Khalil, Executive Director of the Texas Gulf Coast Area Labor Federation, board member of Houston Federation of Teachers, and contributor to Power Concedes Nothing. Kristie Shackelford, member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Local 896. She was a release staffer on our 2020 program in the Texas Gulf Coast. And Lorraine Montemayor, mobilization and campaign coordinator with the Texas AFL-CIO. So I don't think I need to tell anybody how difficult 2020 was, but it was a defining moment for a lot of us in the fight for working people and to advance progressive causes. We were hit by 4 pandemics in the United States: COVID-19, an economic recession, climate crisis, and racial uprisings. We also were dealing with an authoritarian president who gave voice and power to white supremacist movements in the US and around the world. So in the book, Power Concedes Nothing, we made an argument about the power that grassroots organizers brought to the fight to defeat Trump, and the work that underpinned that work, that made it possible, made all the progress that we made possible. National progressives often have a static view about right-wing control of Texas politics. And there's a lot of dangerous legislation that makes headlines across the country, but there's a lot more to Texas than the headlines that you may see. And that's why we're excited today to have panelists who can talk about what's really happening in Texas on the ground, and the hope that we all have for the future that motivates us to wake up every day and keep doing this work. So Hany, I'm going to start with you. In the chapter that we co-authored, you talk about members who work in some of the hardest hit sectors of who were hardest hit by the pandemic, members that were working in hospitality and entertainment. So when you think about the work that we did to address to get ready for an electoral season, a really important electoral season, in the context of so much struggle and so many members that were out of work. How did you ramp up for the 2020 elections? What did we do for to get ready in that context, in that really challenging context of 2020?
Challenging it was. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you. In 2020, our Federation of Unions, it's about 90 unions, 60,000 union members in 13 Texas Gulf Coast counties around Houston. We leveraged the reorganization and modernization of our labor council that had been underway for about 5 years to run the biggest and most effective electoral program we had run to date. We had, in 2018, run a very strong program and helped elect labor allies to additional Texas House, congressional, and county seats. But building on that success, we dramatically increased turnout among union members in the Houston region, helped elect some down ballot candidates, and helped narrow Donald Trump's margin in Texas compared to 2016. So when we started planning our Labor 2020 program, we, like everybody, thought we'd be able to do in-person outreach. And then lo and behold, in March, COVID hit, and that forced us to rethink our approach. And so by May, we recognized that the odds of being able to talk to people at the doors was pretty low. And so we decided instead to reconfigure our approach and layered as many elements as possible to make up for that, what we expected to be a lack of in-person contact. The core of our program was about 20 union members who joined us, that were on loan to us from several unions, the Steelworkers and the Brotherhood of Maintenance and Way employees, the theatrical and stage employees, the Federation of Government Employees, insulators, and transport workers. And phone banking, rather than door knocking, became the heart of our work. We also upped our digital outreach with a graphic designer that helped make our ads more appealing, and we ran targeted ads on Facebook and Google. We ran a large mail program with pieces tailored to each county and every congressional district. And all of that together made sure that every member that we reached out to got multiple contacts, from text messages and calls and mailers and digital impressions too. And so one of the things that we're actually most proud of is that we really scaled up and strengthened a coordinator worksite program. So we were one of the first labor councils in the country to adopt the AFL-CIO's new worksite organizing tool called Action Builder for electoral use. And it's something we encourage everybody to look into. It allowed unions to track political conversations they had in the workplace, just as they would in a union organizing drive. And 3 of our unions made extensive use of it. In total, we made 200,000 phone calls, distributed 25,000 worksite flyers. Our digital ads were viewed 3 million times, and we sent 120,000 pieces of mail to union households. And we talked to folks, or we attempted to talk to folks 4 times in our phone banks. So in the end, we contributed to a significant sweep of countywide offices in both Harris County and Fort Bend County to our southwest. And we helped cut Trump's statewide lead from 9% in 2016 to 5.8% in 2020, showing that Texas, in fact, is a battleground state. But having said that, at the state level, we flipped only 1 priority House district in our region. And statewide, we didn't make any progress to our goal of flipping 9 Texas House seats. And the result was that we left that redistricting was in the hands of our opponents, and we were very much on the defensive again in the 2021 legislative session.
Yeah, I'm having some flashbacks to 2020 right now and thinking about the nightmare of phone banking on Zoom. But I think we're having some technical difficulties right now. Hany, you have your camera's been frozen this whole time, so I think we're gonna take a break real quick so that we can try to fix this and then come right back. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the next to ask some questions for Lorraine, who was doing the same work in the rest of the state. The Texas Gulf Coast region is 13 counties around Houston, but there are actually 154 counties in Texas. So even though our section around Houston was important, there was a lot more work going on across the state. So Lorraine, can you talk a little bit about how the state Fed and unions across Texas have been building infrastructure to get ready? We're building infrastructure over years to get ready for the 2020 elections.
Most definitely. Thank you, Jay. Once again, my name is Lorraine Montemayor. I'm the Mobilization and Campaign Coordinator for the Texas AFL-CIO. I have been in this role for about 2.5, 3 years. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to work with our union members, our key affiliates, our Central Labor Council leaders, to really build out our political muscle as the labor movement, build a movement of workers, and bring back power into the hands of our workers all across Texas. In my role, as I mentioned, I get to work with central labor bodies. Those are coalitions of all of our unions who come together in different parts of the state. We have about 18 central labor councils across the state, and then 1 area labor federation, which is represented under the leadership of Hany and Jay's political direction. these central labor councils come together and create priorities in their jurisdictions, which are different counties. Some CLCs have a couple of counties in their jurisdictions, and others have large, vast amounts of counties within their backyards to go ahead and oversee how to push policies that will support our working families in those counties. So when we talk about how we ramp up or what we're doing at the state fed level or how we got prepared for 2020 and this word of infrastructure, right? There's a lot of mechanics and logistics that go into running electoral campaigns, creating that muscle memory within our labor council leaders to go ahead and engage all of their affiliates, their rank and file members to participate in electoral politics. That stems from having trainings on how best to put our message and our values out into the world into the conversations that our members are having day to day at their work sites or as we go out and door knock right on their front porches. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that in 2020. We were all confined to phones. And I think that is one big lesson learned in 2020 of how what went well and what didn't, and how we can build community in a COVID era when we're not being able to be out in community with our brothers and sisters. So this infrastructure, the member-to-member program that I help lead with all the central labor councils across the state, depending on their priorities, is the vehicle for us to use for leadership development, right? When rank and file members can come into the fold of the work and really own the work, bring their voices, bring their stories into the work of our electoral politics of what are the issues that they're hearing are moving their members to be politically engaged at the work sites that can translate onto our script that we're having at the doors, developing them with the skills on how to have these conversations, how to use the tools like LAN, how to cut turf, how to make phone lists, how to get into the nitty gritty of all the mechanics that are required to build out the infrastructure to have successful long-term political gains in our state, because we all know that there's a lot at stake in each electoral cycle. All politics are local, and being able to empower and embolden our members to take ownership through that. And of course, within that leadership development comes the capacity building, right? Being able to do more work as a labor body in a specific region, so that way we can extend our reach, extend our message, extend our capacity to move more individuals to get out and vote. So I hope I answered your question, Jay. I might have happy to follow up with anything.
Yeah, and I think that right now, even though we have wonderful technicians that are helping us to keep this on track, you can see the challenges with technology. And this was what we were constantly dealing with, just trying to troubleshoot Zoom on the fly with 30 people making phone calls. This was a lot of fun. And just a reminder to everybody, please drop your questions in the chat. If you have any specific questions, again, we've got Lorraine, who has been working in labor in Texas for close to over a decade, right? In Dallas and now with the State Fed.
Yes.
And then Hany as well. And then Kristie, who was actually relatively new to the labor movement when she came on board as a release staffer with us in 2020. So Kristie, you were working in the entertainment industry, which Houston's entertainment industry is actually the second largest in the country, the theater industry, second largest in the country. A lot of people aren't aware that we have the most seats behind Manhattan.
Yeah.
But all of those seats were empty in the spring of 2020. And that meant that a lot of people were out of work, unfortunately. And so I'm curious how what your experience was, and I'm genuinely curious because we work together. I'm curious what your experience was in that context, coming on, working with us, helping to craft how we were talking about the mediums we were talking in, and how we were responding. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Jay. It was awesome in the sense of something being grand. It was a interesting an interesting pill to swallow, having like jobs after jobs coming to you, and then the very next day, I mean, I was so immersed in my craft. I'm a costume designer freelance, and I work at Houston Grand Opera, and at the time I was working with IATSE and just having everything lined up in my book, and then like literally the next day everything was just like, nope, you can't talk to anybody, can't touch anybody, and that's literally my job. And so um yeah, it was a gut punch. And then as within our union, we were trying to stay connected with each other, because a lot of us, this is everything. Like what we do, interacting with each other, interacting with performers, that's our craft. And it's not like you can just go find another job. Like so many people have built their whole life with what we do. And so we started having weekly meetings so that people can stay connected. And in those meetings, Barb Dolney, our president, mentioned that there was an opportunity here with the AFL-CIO, Gold Coast AFL-CIO. And so I was like, hey, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And didn't know much about it, but I needed something to do because, I was staring at the walls and my kids, and it was getting crazy. So um, I applied and got to know Jay, and we started working. And once as an assistant with him, I learned about all the maps and all of the voter restrictions and all these different things. And all these things that I've heard, you know, the gerrymandering and moving all the lines and like pushing people out and all these things that I really hadn't taken the time um, to really dive into, because I was focused on my career. Uh, they all became so real to me, and it really irritated me, and how much and how manipulative tactics have been and are, when it comes to people fighting for their political seat, and not necessarily fighting for the people they represent, but more or less fighting for themselves. And what I appreciate, the hard work that we did, was making sure that the people who we agreed with understood what working people do, and that's what we work. We don't have the time to go through and look at all these lines and see exactly what all the bills are saying and what every line and piece is about. But there is a group of people who can do that for us, who have our interests, and who push for those interests to be fought against as heavily as the other side is coming in. And so I was really grateful to be a part of that, and being able to work with people from around the state, around the country, to make sure that our voice was heard, and that the people who we needed, as Hany mentioned earlier, we closed that gap, and we got more people in who represented what the working person needs.
Yeah, and Kristie really dug into the crazy patchwork of districts that we have, because we did slate mailers. We did 58 unique slate mailers, and Kristie did a spreadsheet that had all of the districts and like which districts were inside which district, and
Yeah.
it was incredibly time consuming and stressful work, but you realize how complicated it is, because you go one block over and suddenly you're
Mm-hmm.
in a different district, and
Yeah.
it can be really challenging to think through that. um, so just if you're just joining us, welcome to Converge Presents, a discussion of our new must-read book, Power Concedes Nothing: How Grassroots Organizing Wins Elections. It's about the work that grassroots organizers across the country, including those of us here in Texas, did in the 2020 election to challenge and defeat former President Trump, thankfully, former President Trump, and make gains to help us realize real power for working people. So this conversation is with Texas-based organizers Hany Khalil from the Texas Gulf Coast Area Labor Federation, Lorraine Montemayor from the Texas AFL-CIO, and Kristie Shackelford, a rank and file member for MIATSE Local 896 in beautiful Houston, Texas. My name is Jay Malone. I'm the Political and Communications Director from the Texas Gulf Coast Area Labor Federation. And again, thanks to our partners at Convergence Magazine who pulled this discussion together. So I'm just going to throw out some questions and let anybody take them. So the whole concept behind this book, which has chapters that were written by multiple organizers with different perspectives, but the thing that brings it all together is the idea that elections are not the end, but they can be a critical part of building power. So they're a part of the tool, one of the tools that we use to build a real multiracial democracy. So in Texas has unique electoral dynamics, as we all know, but is also a model for organizing in a challenging, if not outright hostile climate for workers. We know that Texas was the birthplace of right to work and so many other tools for Jim Crow influence tools for attacking worker power. So how would you say, or what would you say specific to Texas politics that makes it kind of uniquely challenging? Hany, why don't you take that?
Okay. So, I mean, look, the failure for us to make gains in the Gulf Coast, this actually, I think, really reflected the national pattern and the statewide pattern, with the exception, of course, of electing Biden-Harris and flipping Georgia's Senate seat and a little bit more. So in that sense, I think it's not specific to Texas politics, but there is some stuff that is very specific. And here in Texas, there are at least two main challenges we face. So one is low turnout, and the other is our pretty unique geography. So in terms of turnout, we consistently rank in the bottom 5 states in terms of overall voter turnout. Not an accident, actually by design, by laws that promote the suppression of votes. And even though the majority of Texans live in urban areas, only 20% live in our big 5 cities. And that means that turning out voters is incredibly difficult and expensive in Texas. So it's tough. But having said that, I believe that labor's electoral work has become increasingly effective despite those conditions. So just in our region, for instance, where slightly more than 60% of registered voters cast a ballot, over 90% of our union members voted. Again, not by accident, but by very, very hard work of people like Kristie. And so there is also no question that more gains were possible. We saw up to a 10-point gap between the top and the bottom of the ticket. Biden won almost all of our competitive state House districts and lost all but one. And the margin between winning and losing all of those districts was just 16,000 votes, 16,000 spread across 14 state House districts. So it was close. There were real fights, and with a little bit more investment, with a little bit more work, we think we could have flipped that. So for us, we've really tried to process that, and our attitude is we need to rethink the basis of our electoral work. And part of that for us is that we understand, and we start from the idea that union affiliates, our unions have a very strong culture of civic engagement, even in a right to work state, even in a hostile state like ours. But what we need to do is grow the labor movement to get more members involved in doing the electoral work and to be able to talk to more workers about what's at stake in elections. And that really is the challenge we face. We just don't have enough organizations at the grassroots level. We don't have, our unions are not big enough compared to the challenges we face. If we can turn that around, I think we're going to be able to move Texas politics.
Yeah, one of the other unique challenges in Texas is we have elections about every other week. That's not actually true, but they are very regular. We are 5 days away from primary runoff election, and the primary was at the beginning of March, and then we had school district and city council elections last November, and then a runoff in December. So it's exhausting working in politics down here. But Lorraine, I know that you have both experienced the vast geography of Texas and the challenges of our frequent elections through some of these really important runoffs that are coming up. I know you've been spending some time down in San Antonio and in the Valley for Jessica Cisneros' race. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe some lessons that we've taken from, previous cycles to really leverage our work effectively in that critical election.
Yeah, most definitely. You're absolutely right. It does feel like there's always an election happening in Texas. I agree with the challenges that we faced in 2020 was geographical. Our state is large, and we do need to double down and do more internal organizing as a movement to really build out our power. In 2020, we had 67 lost timers. So Kristie was one of 67. It was a presidential year. Of course, it is our goal and our effort to multiply, double that, even in the midterm election, right? The more we bring into the fold of the work of our members into the fold of our work, the more we have those one-on-one conversations of our labor issues with our union members, the more we see that our union members go out to the polls. So that is the strategy that moving forward, and it's a heavy lift, but I think everybody who is in the labor movement sees it and is in it to win it and be all in. We are in a runoff, Congressional District 28. We have about 5 released staffers. So in comparison to what we had in the presidential election, 67 to 5, right? And it's one congressional district. Kristie, you mentioned how you didn't realize that maps were really as gerrymandered as they were, and 28 is one for the books, right? There is all kinds of curves that happen. There's 9 counties in this huge congressional district. There's multiple language in this district that we're having to overcome, right? Trying to find more bilingual organizers who can meet the voters and speak to them in the language that they feel most comfortable in, is something that we need to really think about and move forward. I know that ALF did a lot of good work in 2020 about translating lit into the various languages that the voters feel more comfortable in reading and writing. So I think that is another challenge in Texas electoral politics, is making sure that our information is being reflective of the multiracial diversity of our state. Zoom is great, yes, we're all Zoomed fatigue. We felt it, but I appreciated this technology because it was able to build community. I could hang out with folks from Tarrant on a Friday night and then go hang out with folks from the Valley, 30 minutes later, or they can all jump onto a text bank and send out texts or make phone calls for a specific candidate that they don't have to drive and make that commitment or drive, 3 hours away to go to a 2-hour block walk. So that using that technology moving forward in ways to expand our reach is something that we're looking into. And then the other thing is our script, right? Like when we were in the primary of 2020, we shifted our language to meet the voters where they're at and not overlook that people were hurting, right? Like economically hurting. Like, how could we go to their door and ask them to go out and vote when we know that they may have lost their jobs? So, what could we as a labor movement use this time to also alleviate and bring some relief and have that real conversation with the voter and then move them through that ladder of engagement, move them through the script to go out and vote and create that social pressure or those connections between, okay, this is what's happening. Here is a candidate who is speaking our language or our values, and this is how we then create the change, right? So that is happening down in CD 28 too, right? Like people are upset about gas prices and grocery prices and not having enough. They're just struggling financially, right? There's multi-generation families that we're speaking to. There's that shared debt of college debt that is happening in these households, and making sure that we meet our union members and these voters with what is on the kitchen table for them. What are those kitchen table issues that we need to talk about first before getting them to move to vote?
Yep. Thank you for that, Lorraine. And I do have to make a quick fact check. Zoom is actually terrible, but
I know.
So we
know.
do have quite a bit of jargon in union political world. One thing is lost timers or release staff. This is when generally a union or an international union pays a member to come off the shop floor or come out of their normal job to work for a central labor body or for a state federation to help run a political outreach and political education programs. And we use them pretty much interchangeably, lost timer and release staff. And that's what Kristie was actually on with us as a release staffer again. And I'm curious, Kristie, following up on that, like, since you worked on our communications program, and obviously that was a big part of our overall work, figuring out, what ways to communicate with people, how to say different things, and we had kind of a brain trust where we were all trying to figure out how to do that. But what lessons would you have for people going into 2022, where we have very different dynamics? Like, what do you think you took away from that might be interesting for this upcoming election?
Yeah, I think my biggest learning curve was trying to focus my creative brain because I would come up with some really crazy ideas and Jay would just sit there and nod and smile and I'd be like, but it'll make sense. But I think that with that experience and all of my other work experiences, making sure to highlight, especially the things that people get frustrated with, like Lorraine mentioned, the gas prices, food prices, housing issues, all these things that are near and dear to people that everyone deserves to keep and deserves to have, but will, instead of taking action or recognizing the power that they have, we tend to fuss about it in our little circles at work, with our friends at work, and we don't really do any action. And so I would say to those of us who are aware of what action can do, whenever you hear those little mosquito conversations that just kind of buzz around, instead of just letting them die there, be like, you know what? Call your congressman, send an email, give them some information, let them know how you feel right now, because that's what the other side is doing. And that's how these situations are the way they are. And the more people that understand how that works, I think the more people that can combat what the pressure is on the working person. A lot of times, I won't say a lot of times, the first time that I came across a situation, I can't remember the exact problem, but my union president, Barb, I told her about an issue I was having, and she was like, "Oh, let me call my senator." And I was like, "What? You're gonna call your senator?" But they're all the way in Washington, D.C. But like, no, she was like on it, and emails were sent, and I was emailing this person, and within a week, my issue, I remember, was resolved. I was like, oh my goodness. I came across that same situation last year when all the parents were getting that $250 per kid, and my payment suddenly stopped. And I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to call my congresswoman. And sure enough, I did. And within a month, I was getting what I deserved. And I think that more people, when you understand, like, these people who we elect have like, we have the power to confront them and say, hey, this is a problem for me right now. I put you in power. Do something with that power. It's really important to make sure that we know we have that voice, and don't just stay in your little bubbles at your water coolers or at your desks or your cubicles or backstage, or if you're on a high-rise building the steel frames of the Houston skyline. We have to not let it stay there. We have to require the people who we elect to help us and meet us where we are, because if not, the divide between who has things and who doesn't is going to get further and further and further apart. And then one day we're going to wake up and we're all going to be too hurt to function and too hurt to move forward if we don't consistently challenge the things that are separating us now.
Thank you, Kristie. That was really well said. And I think that's, one thing that we all know is that if Elon Musk wants to pick up the phone and get a member of Congress or senator to do something, he'll do it, and they'll answer. But actually, a lot of times, working people can do the same thing. Some of our members, our local members, you could literally call them on their cell, and they give them out regularly. But even if you can get their office and they can help out. There are all these constituency services that are offered, and it just kind of requires expanding the possible. We wouldn't hesitate to reach out to a neighbor or a coworker for help, or a family member, but we also do have allies or representatives in government that can help when we're having problems. And I think that one thing that I think was really interesting in the 2020 cycle was how the challenging circumstances that we were in also required us to rethink how we were using different tools. IATSE in particular locally made use of an organizing tool, Action Builder, really effectively as a mutual aid tool. I don't know if 896 did it, but I know 51 did it, where they basically used it to set up phone trees and get out the word and check in on people. We then used Action Network actually as part of our program as a worksite organizing tool. So it's kind of taking these tools that are used in one area and thinking about how we can use it more holistically, because ultimately mutual aid, electoral organizing, worksite organizing, these are all connected. They're all ways of building power collectively. And I think that's one of the lessons I took. I am Hany, I think we've got you back. Your video is back up, so I'm going to ask you. That was one lesson that I took from our 2020 cycle, is that we have to think holistically about how all of our work is connected and intersects. So what other lessons, now that we're about to go into another electoral cycle, what lessons have you taken from 2020 that we're applying to 2022?
So I would say that one of the biggest ones we have taken away is how important it is to make sure we're talking to voters at the doors and having personal conversations with them. We just cannot underestimate that. There's no question that the enthusiasm that Republicans had was huge, substantial, and that we underestimated it. But I think that one of the plays that they made that was effective was, we have to be honest with ourselves, is that we were doing the right thing and the wise thing by deciding to not knock on people's doors when vaccines hadn't been distributed. That was the safe thing to do. They didn't care. They were still knocking on their members' doors. They were talking to people and having conversations and getting them riled up, and that was effective. And frankly, if we and the rest of the movement had adopted Unite Here's protocols, Unite Here, the Hospitality Workers Union, they figured out how to knock on doors long before vaccines were out and how to do it safely. And had we figured that out, or we'd followed them earlier and had the rest of the movement, not just here in Texas, but all across the country, done that, I think we would have had a much, we would have helped elect Biden with much higher numbers. We would have moved forward in Texas more. So we cannot underestimate the importance of that critical work of talking to people at their doors, what we call field work, as opposed to phones and all the other pieces that can supplement, but we have to talk to people at the doors. That is the core of an effective political program, and we need more people to be focused on that. And I know here is going to continue to do that this year, for instance. So that's one. I think a second piece is that we need not only more investment in Texas, but we need to continue to figure out creative vehicles through which we get investment so we can do more effective political work. So, let me just explain what I'm saying. So there's unions, for instance, and allied organizations invested in Texas in greater amounts than they ever had before in 2020. And it made an absolute difference. But it wasn't enough at the scale necessary to flip Texas. Just as Texas AFL-CIO's PAC, for instance, got the largest investment that it had, but to be able to move forward at the scale that we needed an order probably of 10 times the amount of resources coming into the Texas AFL-CIO's PAC. For us, our assessment was that there are a number of Texas House districts that could be flipped in our region, and we worked them very hard. But our challenge is we don't have the density in those districts to have the impact that we need to. What I mean by density, union density, is the percentage of workers that live in those regions or in those districts that are members of unions. And so, we tend to be denser in the Southeast Texas and Southeast Houston, the older parts of the industry, whereas say in the Northwest and Southwest, which have been more recently populated, we're not nearly as dense. And so the reality is, no matter how effective our program is, no matter how many union members we can turn out to vote, it's not going to be enough to flip those districts. And so we realized we've got to put in place vehicles to allow us to talk to non-union members. We can use our own members' dues to talk to union members. That's completely within the law. But to be able to talk to workers who are not yet in unions, we need other vehicles like a PAC. And so we decided to set up a PAC to allow us to do that and raise funds from our members to do that, not with dues, but with their own COPE donations or PAC donations to be able to do that work. And we launched that last fall. It's been a very effective tool. We've used it in the primaries. It's continued to be effective. And we think that's going to be one of the critical tools in enabling us to continue to move forward in our major county races that are coming up. We have a critical race, for instance, to reelect Lina Hidalgo as Harris County judge, the leader of the county. She's been one of the staunchest defenders of workers' rights and our health and standard labor standards in the state of Texas. And when Governor Abbott decided to abandon protection of workers' health during the pandemic and has focused his resources and his time on trying to out-Trump Trump. So that's the challenge we face. And we're just going to continue to figure out what are the tools we need to put in place to be as effective to maximize our political impact and move Texas forward.
And, a lot of people were thinking about Texas last summer when our legislators broke quorum. But they broke quorum to block a really ugly voter suppression bill that ultimately, unfortunately, did pass. But the bill that was right up after that and about to pass was one that would have outlawed or prevented cities from implementing water breaks for construction workers, which it's May in Texas right now. And I think today it was in the low 90s. We're going to have a lot of 100-degree days here. And you think, last year our state government was trying to pass bills that prevent workers from getting water breaks. So Lorraine, I know that y'all are actually based, the state Fed is based right across the street from the Capitol. So in the context of all of the terrible things that have happened since 2020, the terrible session and then the multiple terrible special sessions, how are you taking that and using it for fuel going into the 2022 cycle, and keeping people motivated, so that we can actually look out for some wins in the coming years?
Yeah, so there was a lot of bad legislation that is fuel in our bellies, and propelling us to really dig deep and make sure that we get everybody out to the polls. I think going back to like how to keep our base engaged or what more can we do, I think that goes to your comment about the water break ordinances. I think going back to local politics and looking at our commissioner courts and what we can pass, what kind of resolutions or what kind of ordinances at the local level to keep things percolating within our members where there are potential ballot measures. Thinking back of my time in Dallas when we were built out a big, broad coalition in support of paid sick leave being on as a ballot measure and trying to get that onto the ballot for voters to go ahead and make that decision, collecting all those signatures. I feel that, yeah, it's gonna be speaking to the issues, speaking to potential policy wins that are going to keep our base engaged and motivated to keep going. Yes, our organization keeps track of vote records that are happening at our state capitol, and we can use that in our endorsement process, and that is part of our political programs moving forward. But we always know that the legislators are going to try to preempt everything that we do. So let's focus on what we can or where we can move the needle and create engagement at the local level. But we definitely are keeping our elected officials accountable in the process at the state level as well. So since redistricting has happened, I think we'll see how and where we can play after this election. Like I feel like we got a big reset, an unfair reset, right? Because of not having a complete census count. But there were some gains, right? Like we are able to get 2 additional congressional seats. But yeah, I feel that as we push the envelope and push the needle and motivate our voters to local policy wins or local elections, we can help the up ballot tickets and start focusing on the legislative accountability process.
Yeah, and I appreciate the focus on local because we're definitely prioritizing looking at our county commissioners in Texas. Each county is governed by 5 commissioners. One is called a county judge, even though they're not a judge. Lena Hidalgo, for those of you who know her, she's not a judge. That's just the title for a county executive. And it's a kind of a strange system, but it's a lot of frontier states have similar setups. And we've seen a ton of progress in the last 4 years in localities. Like you said, Dallas ultimately did pass a paid sick leave ordinance that was struck down by a federal court right at the beginning of the pandemic. It's kind of a nightmare. But we have had a lot of successes that haven't been struck down. And those are things that we continue to build on, even in the context of a really hostile state government. And I think, Kristie, going back to that question about issues, one thing that you emphasized in talking about kind of what you learned about the importance of governance is like the specific things, like the constituent services. If you have a problem, you can reach out to your legislator. But I'm curious, like now that you've been through this process, are there specific issues that you see, like voting and getting active in politics as, like these are things that I can fix if I get involved and help to elect the right people and hold them accountable? Are there any specific issues that you've been looking at?
Well, yeah. Specifically, current issues. I mean, women's rights is just in the forefront right now. And the onslaught is really devastating to me. And I'm still trying to figure out why it's so heavy and prevalent at this moment in time, to try and understand like where my trajectory or passionate outcry should focus. A lot of, I mean, just for minorities, African Americans, things that affect us in the workplace, equal pay for genders and minorities. You know, there's so many things um, where you kind of sometimes feel it can be a little insurmountable. It's a little too much to tackle. But one of my favorite adages is to say, you know, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Not that I'm advocating eating elephants, but the imagery of something that looks so huge, you just start, you know. But there are all those different things that when you're in a group like with my local, you're in a group of people and we all kind of have these same interests and these same passions, and it's important for us to come together to be able to call upon our legislators and look for leaders locally and statewide and nationally who they might not agree with everything, but if they are reasonable enough to understand that each individual person should have the right and the autonomy to live their life and to be happy and to find joy and to come home to a safe place at the end of the day. Those things are most important to all of us, and how can we protect that for everyone? And how can we find leaders who understand that for all? And there's something to be said. I can't remember. I think I saw it a few days ago where I can't remember what legislator it was, but someone said, I have a right to I've taken an oath to protect the people who elected me. I think it was Abbott. And I started thinking, you know, the things that you're doing, who are the people who elected you? Who are you really protecting? Because it doesn't seem like you're protecting all Texans. It seems like there's this group of people who you know will keep you and have your back. And so we need to really work on educating those who may think that we're too far on the left or way too far to understand anything. Really, we're all focused on the same things and wanting the same things and needing the same things, but it boils down to that personal satisfaction, personal happiness that we all deserve. You know, I think that all of those things together, those issues and rights and all the fights that we have to try and make sure people are hearing what we're saying, at the end of the day, if we can just tackle a little bit of that mountain to make it a better life for people who come behind us, I think that's probably the motivating factor that keeps you going, even though sometimes you do have to deal with defeat, and also teaching the generation that comes behind us. You know, I'm really interested in seeing what kind of legislators are going to be on the ballot in 10, 15 years, considering what they're seeing right now and the information that's available to them right now, and keeping that further view of what will happen can help to motivate what we're doing today as well, I think.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, the thing that stands out to me with what you're saying is just how reasonable all these things that, you know, we're talking about are, you know, people having control over their lives, you know, in and out of work, having control over their bodies. That's not a radical position. And yet we have people, you know, at the state level, they're doing things like, I mean, our attorney general sued to overturn the sick leave ordinance, forcing people who are sick to go to work, or, you know, otherwise they might have to not eat or lose their home. Also, he's now in the process of suing to take away the $15 federal minimum wage for contractors. Like, that's 300,000 Texans who will, you know, their government is fighting to take money out of their pockets, and those are just one in a series. So we have extreme radicalism, you know, attacking very
Yeah,
reasonable. Yeah,
real quick,
Kristie, you have a quote?
yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that. $15 an hour is $30,000 a year. So I mean, when people you have $15 an hour, but it's just $30,000 a year. And if you have a family, if you need multiple streams of income to make it, if you have a family of 4 or 3, I believe, you would qualify for food stamps at that. And so like for someone to take that away, it really bothers and burns to know that people are not really contextualizing what that means for somebody. That could be the difference between somebody going to college or somebody not, like, just having the same type of lifestyle that doesn't let them get higher or doesn't let them have the mobility that they deserve.
Well, Kristie, I'm really excited to sign you up for a couple of volunteer shifts so you can deliver that exact message on the doors this fall. But I think we're closing out right now. So I'm going to kick it over to Hany, and just to kind of wrap up the lessons that we want to communicate to people out there that we learned from the 2020 cycle and our work over the last 5 or 6 years at the ALF.
Sure. So, look, it nationally right now, and especially in the wake of the attacks in Buffalo, the murders there, it looks pretty bleak nationally. And I think there are a lot of folks who are saying to themselves, well, we're going to have major setbacks in the fall of 2020 and 2022. And what are we going to do in 2024? I want people to have a little bit of perspective. So look, in Texas, we have seen some setbacks and some advances in the last 20 years. And in particular, we have been steadily eroding the Republican presidential margin. So even though that they're coming at us hard, and that's what people tend to see, I want you just to stay focused on that. And the fact is that we've actually been making steady gains at the state level. We've been electing allies at the local level, and we've been driving forward an agenda to expand protections for working people, slowly but surely, without giving up. And the reality is that our steady progress is exactly what the right wing is terribly afraid of. We know, and they know, that when we change Texas, we will change the United States. And then we will change the world, frankly. And that's because the number of votes we have in the Electoral College is so large that once Texas goes for a pro-labor president, it's going to be a generation before our opponents are able to potentially be competitive again. And that, frankly, is why they're so aggressive right now on attacking voting rights and gerrymandering districts. And frankly, it's reminiscent of the Jim Crow era. But I got to tell you, that is not daunting us. That is not stopping us. It is not slowing us down. We are very much focused in the labor movement in the Gulf Coast and in Texas on keeping our eyes on the prize. And the way we look at it is, if we just focus on organizing more workers into unions, if we train more members, if we prioritize field and worksite organizing, if we continue winning gains at the local level, we absolutely believe that over time, we are going to flip this state. And then we're going to be able to go on the offense for working families in Texas and in the entire country. So we've tried to take the lessons. We believe we're going to move Texas forward. And we hope that other people around the country will see that Texas is very much in change. It's in process of moving forward, but we're going to need your support to work with us too.
All right. That's a good place to end. So thanks to Lorraine, Kristie, and Hany for joining us tonight. Thanks for everybody who watched. You can order a copy of the book at powerconcedesnothing2022.com. You can also follow this channel and Facebook page. You can check out our work at the Area Labor Federation at gcaflco.org. Our social feeds are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram are all GCAFLCIO. The state fed is texasaflcio.org. They also have a wonderful presence on social media, and you can see all the exciting things. This has actually been a really exciting week in Texas labor, so please check us out on social media. And please stay tuned for more information about all the exciting work that was done in 2020 to build power and put us in a good position to win moving forward. Thanks, y'all.